Welcome back, everybody, to the School Leadership Show. Trying something new here today. Little video action. Hi, Jen.
Hi, Mike. I'm here
And
not as
many
co-host today. Also, two new things.
two new things. And we also have with us, many of you might recognize, Kim Marshall. How you doing, Kim?
Very good.
We never get to talk and see each other. I just send you audio recordings of my voice every week. So
Uh, Along with the cool jazz.
the cool, that was a great suggestion, by the way. For those of you who don't listen to the audio version of the Marshall memo, well, that's on you. That's your problem, but you should. All right, so
Yes.
Jen and I have Kim here for a really special reason. Jen, you want to talk about what we're doing here today?
Sure. Oh, so now I'm both co-host and I'm also guest.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. Well, Kim and I, a few years back, he graciously invited me on to co-write a couple of books, Best of Marshall Memo books, where we chose some of the topics that school leaders care the most about. And we combed through thousands of articles in his archives to find the best 10 to 15 articles on each topic, and we put them into books. And books are great. You know, I love books, but you can't just add a chapter onto a book. So we were fortunate to get a grant to put all of that content up onto a website, bestofmarshallmemo.org. So now it's all available for free, but it's also, we can change and we can add to it. So I don't know how many chapters we have. Kim, do you know how many?
Now we have 25.
25. And so just this month, we are uploading a new chapter. Kim suggested that we focus on the topic of supporting new teachers because it is so important and it's also timely this time of year. You got to think about how you're going to support and onboard and welcome your new teachers now. Right now, we're recording this in May, but when you welcome your teachers back in August and September. So we're here today to talk about this new chapter, which will be uploaded shortly.
And I have a dog in this fight because Jen knows. In September, my daughter started her first teaching job, teaching third grade at the Rochester School for the Deaf. So I am watching a first year teacher from the other side. So I can't wait for this conversation. Let's just jump right into it. So, what were some of as you were looking through the best of articles, what were some of the themes that emerged related to supporting new teachers?
Well, one of them was looking back on my own experience starting as a sixth grade teacher many years ago in a Boston public middle school, and just what a really rough time I had and how little support I had. I remember the assistant principal saying, "You got through to February. Usually February is the hump. If you get past February, you'll be okay." Meanwhile, he was not helping me very much, and I was very naive. And so I just, thinking about what would have made the difference for me. I barely survived this first year. Like, what kind of structures in the school, what kind of support. Of course, I wanted to send all the misbehaving kids to the office, but that's not the solution. So we hunted around through the archive in all kinds of different categories, like expert teaching, discipline, school climate, professional working conditions, all those things, to try to find the very best articles that would the support a new teacher and help them get through that, what is often a tough first year.
So yeah, and then what we do once we gather all these articles is we sort of organize them into themes so that they are so you could read a chunk of them together. So that the first area is the whole idea of onboarding. Those first few days and weeks when you're bringing the new teachers on, as well as professional working conditions. So that was sort of the first group. So Kim, should we talk about some of the articles in the first section?
Sure. Well, there's a wonderful program which actually was implemented at a high school that's about a mile away from where I am right now, where both of my children went, Brookline High School in Massachusetts. And it was just a very thoughtful way. At this point, this high school was getting 25 new teachers a year. And they realized that they really had to gear up and create a program. So they put these two teachers on special assignment, Margaret Metzger and Gail Davis, and they just created this whole program that involved Jen, remind me of some of the things like a monthly meeting, classroom
Yeah.
visits, where do I find the Xerox machine? Like where's my key? All kinds of stuff from the sublime to the mundane.
Yeah, can I tease a few of those out? Because I do think, for our listeners, they're great takeaways. One of them is they have new teachers observe veteran teachers, which immediately not only shows you, okay, here are some ways to do routines and procedures and not send all the kids to the office just like Kim was doing. No, I was doing that too. And but also building relationships, right? Because often there's some tension between veteran teachers and our newer teachers. So that's a great idea. My favorite is this monthly seminar. I tap some of your teacher leaders who are really strong teachers, pay them a stipend and see if you can get them to meet with your new teachers once a month, or I really think once every other week, where there are some topics that you're discussing, whether it's classroom management or, nuts and bolts. I can't remember, how I ask for a book or, questions like that. But then also, like, let's share some challenges that we're dealing with. I've got a parent who's really difficult, or we have parent teacher conferences coming up and I don't really know how to talk to parents. So I think the monthly seminar, the observing veteran teachers, and then the other thing is the coordinators of this monthly seminar, Gail Davis and Margaret Metzger, they observe the teachers, yes, the new teachers, yes, to give feedback, but also to tweak their program, to figure out what are they struggling with and what else should we be doing. So I thought that was brilliant. And they capped it off with an overnight retreat, not at the end of the year, but when the first quarter grades were turned in, which I think is a wonderful little mini celebration and also bonding. So there are a lot of great suggestions there.
So let's get this one out of the way. There's two things we got to get out of the way first. There's going to be these new teachers, they're so busy, there's so much to do, time, right? That's the first one. And then we're talking about teachers on special assignment, so that's an expense. So what about the people who are saying, well, listen, we can't put any more demands on these new teachers' time, and how are we going to pay for this?
Hmm. Well, it's very simple. You just go to the bestofmarshallmemo.org website and it's all there. It's free. No, obviously you want to find some funds for this, and we're not encouraging bank robberies or anything like that, but just clever use of funds. But again, the beauty of this website is that all this sort of very concrete information is right there. And by the way, another time saver, and it's a huge thing with new teachers, is of course using ChatGPT. Getting teachers to make effective use of artificial intelligence for lesson planning, for creating lists of stuff, for even for addressing, I've got this third grader who's confused about this particular concept and he's interested in, Formula One racing. Give me some ideas, and it will do it, which is pretty amazing.
I also think another way to save time is simply by having your new teachers meet after school or during lunch. You're preventing so many other problems. So, for example, there's an article here by Paul Bambrick Santoyo, and he teases out what we should be working on with new teachers for the first 90 days. He has one strand for, rigor and content, and he has one strand for, classroom management. And he has whoever is supervising new teachers slowly introduce the different topics. And so hopefully the thinking is if you have your rigor and your classroom management more under control, you're saving so much time with dealing with, you wake up on November 1 and you didn't put any classroom procedures into place. So that's one thing for time. And also relationships, just, broken relationships where new teachers don't have anyone to turn to. And there's a statistic in this chapter that we put together where researchers found that 11% of first year teachers leave by the end of the first year, and 20 to 40% of new teachers leave within the first 5 years. So that's a very expensive proposition to lose a teacher and have to replace them. So that's another way to save money, is actually to get your teachers to stay.
And
Well, yeah, go ahead.
let's jump ahead to one of the other articles, which is crying in front of your kids. So there's this very poignant article by Jennifer Gonzalez when she was a new middle school teacher. Things were going haywire in the classroom, and somebody, hit somebody else, and so things were going on, and she felt like the tears coming, and she fled and cried in the ladies' room while someone else covered her class, and then she has some very practical stuff about what do you do, when you feel like you're going to cry in front of the kids, and is that okay? And she had a very specific technique, which I will not give away, for how to handle that situation when your gorge is rising and you just have to, because a lot of teachers, they don't cry in front of the kids, but then they go home and cry at home. So I think there's very practical stuff there too. And
Yeah, if I could step back from what Kim is saying, so in this chapter or section, it's not really a chapter, I guess, if it's online, there are 4 parts. And the first 2 parts are geared more toward the school leader. So school leaders who are listening now, suggestions for structures and procedures and programs to put in place to support those new teachers. And then the second 2 sections are really teachers themselves could read these and you could pass these along to them because imagine being a first year teacher and perhaps, welling up and practically crying in front of the kids and then having a leader who's supportive of you say, here's a couple of articles about what some teachers went through their first year, including teachers who then became, teacher of the year. So they're inspirational, but they're also very practical with some tips for the new teachers themselves.
So can we go back to the leaders? So let's, if we're going to tell, obviously we want the leaders to take a look at what you've put together and curated, because honestly, that is where the value is these days, right? All the information is out there. The problem is, getting to what you need. So if we were going to, provide other takeaways for school leaders to support this work, what would we tell them?
Well, I would go straight to the issue of scheduling. Scheduling the third grade teachers. I hope your daughter's team of third grade teachers has a meeting time. And I was just talking to a teacher the other day who says, I never have time to meet, which is ridiculous. So getting same subject, same grade level, teachers, algebra teachers, whoever it is, the time to meet during the school day then and being able to put their heads together and then creating the PLC environment. PLC is sort of an overused term, but where teachers who teach the same subject, whether it's Shakespeare plays or whether it's world history or whether it's the Holocaust or whatever it is, they have time to put their heads together and say, Jen, your kids did better at that part of the quiz we gave or the essay we wrote or the artwork we did. What did you do? And teachers begin to share like that. So the structure of the meetings is just, I discovered as a principal, I mean, the schedule is the most powerful document in the whole school.
And
Well,
the
for
great
scheduling too, I remember as an elementary school principal and starting in a building. I had already been a principal. I started in a different building, changed districts, and the master schedule, it was K-5 building, and the master schedule was built around the special area teachers. In fact, it was a group of special area teachers whose job it had become to create the master schedule. So you can imagine what that was like. The music teacher got to have all the first graders on one day and all the second graders on another day. And then what does that do? That eliminates the possibility of common planning time. And I remember it being such not a fight, but it was a struggle to get people to change their mindset around, no, we need to prioritize teachers being able to meet during the school day, because I think there's this belief on the part of some administrators that, well, we don't need to build it in. If they want to meet, they'll do it anyway, right?
Right.
Absolutely not.
But then from the point of view of the specialist teacher, of course, that means that I now have a first grade class first period, then I have a fifth grade class, then I have a second grade class. So, I mean, you can see why they wanted to do that. But, in scheduling, no one has ever, you can never satisfy all the people all the time. And so you got to do kind of an Abe Lincoln thing there, but it sounds like you got your hands around that one.
Well, yeah, sometimes you have to split the baby, and it worked, right? You can find a balance there. Maybe it's not common planning time every day. Maybe it's 3 days a week. So I think the message here is for, like you said, Kim, the master schedule is the holy grail of being able to do any of this work. And I think sometimes it just takes people a second just to look at it in a different way.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
also the other mindset change is when you're working on the schedule as a way to support your new teachers, that's a structural thing for the whole year. And I think sometimes when we think about new teachers, we think about, oh, a few days before the kids come, we're going to have a special meeting with the new teachers to give them their keys and tell them their password, right? Walk them around the building. But that is just the tip of the iceberg. That if we want our teachers to stay for the year and beyond, we need to think about support as not a one and done thing, not a few days before, even a few days into the year. So scheduling is a way to think about it for the year. So I think there are other larger structural changes that you can make to think about it. Think about the PD that you provide throughout the year. Is any of it targeted for first year teachers? Sometimes we focus a lot on, oh, let's do lots of PD on AI. Everyone's talking about AI. But as a first year teacher, you may not know the first thing about, organizing your students into groups, right? Or lining them up to go to lunch. And so sometimes there's this leap. So are we providing targeted PD throughout the year? So there are other changes like that. We might have instructional coaches. Let's say you have a group of instructional coaches who are coaching a wide range of your teachers. Well, do we want to pick people specifically who have expertise and can work with first year teachers or second year teachers? And are you just like, I remember when I was coaching first year teachers and the principal never supervised me or checked in with me. So given these high rates of teacher turnover, maybe as a school leader, you want to spend more time overseeing or meeting with your instructional coaches or your mentors who are working with your first year teachers. So just we have to start thinking about it as like a year, a several year commitment to supporting these new teachers.
One of the other articles deals with the question of whether, administrators are sort of coddling the not so good teachers in the school and keeping them on and not actually getting some people to exit the school to make room for fresh blood, like your daughter, like other good new teachers who bring fresh energy and so forth. Because that's one of the best things about new teachers is the energy. They have the energy, they have the idealism in many cases. And so that's a tough article to read. But we deliberately look for articles that were very sort of hard hitting and practical for administrators as well as for teachers. And by the way, one of the features of the website is, once you get into the Best of Marshall Memo website and look at this particular section, is you actually have access to all the other 24 chapters too. And one of them is on scheduling. And so you can go to that section and see, oh my gosh, there's all these ideas about block scheduling and other things, and what are the trade-offs. And so you have the keys to all the other things, making learning stick, curriculum unit planning, all those things that an administrator might want to, direct teachers toward or look at themselves.
And I think even with approaching it with some intentionality too, I remember, and Kim, you probably remember as a principal too, there were times where I can look back and think about some faculty meetings that were really great, really well organized. And I can think of some that, 5 minutes before the meeting, I was thinking, what am I going to do in here? So, even thinking about it like a classroom, right? If you're depending on what you're doing in that faculty meeting, maybe you group the teachers kind of by experience and put the more experienced ones together. Maybe you do heterogeneous groups sometime. I think even just thinking about it in terms of the adult learning of the staff in the building.
Mm-hmm.
And to differentiate the learning the same way teachers are differentiating with students. When Kim was talking about, some of the best teachers, the most highly effective teachers are leaving, you might think, well, how would I even know if a first year teacher is going to be highly effective? And Kim asked me earlier, just today, we were meeting about something else. And he said, how can you tell, right? If a teacher is struggling and it's October. And I said to him, I think I would look at two areas. I would look at how well are they responding to feedback, right? It's not that their skill is so different in October than it was in September, right? But are they attempting to incorporate feedback, learn from the feedback, learn from their peers, learn online so that they can make some changes? And then the other part, I think, is relationships with students. Do they have a mindset a growth mindset about their students, and are they really building and forging those relationships? And what I would say, one of the articles, the article about effective teachers leaving, there's this very painful quote where a highly effective elementary teacher who was leaving said, if he, the principal, would have said, what's it going to take for me to get you to stay? That's all he had to do. And what I would suggest, I have often suggested that school leaders hold stay interviews rather than exit interviews with their teachers, around March, saying, I value you, I want you to stay. But for new teachers, I read in a different book, and Harry Wong and Rosemary Wong have a book about new teacher induction. And they say those interviews should happen in October and November, not because a teacher is a fully formed professional by October, November, but if you have a sense, this is a teacher who I want to stay, then you can let them know. And you can also find out then, what are your biggest struggles? Oh, you're really struggling with work-life management. Okay, we could do something about that. Or, oh, you're really struggling with which discipline issues to deal with in the classroom and which to send off to the office. We can deal with that. So find out who you think are your new teachers who you'd like to stay. Have these interviews where you ask them, you tell them, I would like you to stay. What's it going to take? How can I support you? And then do something about it.
I was in a large school in Minnesota earlier this year, and they were having a ceremony where the whole faculty was in this large room, and they were calling teachers up in groups around their longevity in the school. And the final guy who was called up had been there for 45 years, and got this standing ovation. And thinking back, I mean, probably, what's the difference between a teacher who will stay a long time and a teacher who will quit, at Christmas of that year? And often it's that question, what would it take getting in there, giving them support? And there's this myth that we should leave new teachers alone and we're going to freak them out if we come into their classrooms. No, we get in there a lot informally, not with a laptop or the pad of paper, but the checklist, but getting in there and just watching, giving them encouragement. I remember a teacher in room 12 in our school who had that the upspeak at the end of every sentence, that went up, So she sounded so tentative with her second graders. And I said, no, you're in charge. You may be 22 years old, but you're just a little piece of advice like that can make all the difference.
Well, and I think too, and from what we know about the generations that are entering the workforce right now, they want feedback.
Hmm.
And I think we ignore that at our peril.
Hmm. Yeah. In my day, I didn't want feedback. No, I just,
No, I was good.
but,
Yep.
but I needed it.
Same.
Yeah.
And it was a different time, right? People weren't coming in and watching us teach, right? That wasn't the norm. We hadn't yet had a Kim Marshall with, his mini observations. So it just was not happening.
Hmm. Yeah, the lead quote in today's Marshall Memo is from John King, who just published an amazing book called Teacher to Teacher. And he talked about how at the age of 12, both of his parents had died. And he was bouncing from family member to family member in New York City and really about to go over to some really not so good stuff. And he talks about the teachers who literally saved his life. It's a very moving book. I don't know if either of you have seen this. Just came out, and he's amazing.
I've seen him tell the story, and
Oh,
it's super, super powerful from when he was commissioner in New York.
right, right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in terms of, so we've talked about what we can do kind of for the administrators, or at least what we want the administrators to focus on. And I think it shouldn't be lost that, people take jobs for a variety of reasons, money, status, opportunity, but people leave jobs typically for one reason, and it's usually their supervisor.
Yep.
So I think focusing on what the leaders can do is really, really big. But then, in terms of the what a new teacher might gain from exploring some of the work that you've curated. What's the hope there?
Well, the articles are very different, so there's lots of different pieces from different people. But in one piece, there is reference to Elena Aguilar's book about building resilience, and there are 12 ways of building resilience. And that's probably another indicator of whether teachers will stay is, do they have the skills to deal with a job that we all know is very difficult, and particularly in your first year. And that involves, people and emotions. And so, do one suggestion either for the leader is you could go through Elena's Aguilar's book Onward. I summarized that for the main idea too, a lot of crossovers. And you could focus on one skill a month for your new teachers. Or you could have them read either the article or the book themselves, things like how can you focus on the bright spots, right? What were the good things from the day? How can you learn to ride the waves of change? How can you have small celebrations, celebrate small wins? How can you acknowledge and better understand your emotions? How can you reframe the events from the day, right? This girl roll her eyes at you, it's a way to reframe that. And so I think developing some of these resilience skills and hearing how other people have done that is one way for new teachers to start.
Hmm. So how's your daughter's first year been?
I don't, depends on the day. Typically, she loves it. and she can't say enough about her students, and which tells me that she entered the right profession. Most of what she talks about is about her students and their joy and that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean the same things you would think about. I did ask her the other day. I said, what's the biggest, sort of obstacle that kind of, is in your way? And she didn't hesitate. She just said it's the gossip among staff.
Hmm.
Like, and I said, that's interesting. I'm like, well, how do you navigate that? And she said, well, I try to stay out of it and whatever. But I think it's interesting when, because that it depends on the environment in the building too, and you have, different buildings have different personalities to some extent. But I think, even just having listening to her talk about that and sort of, work it over in her head that, okay, I recognize that this is an obstacle and I have to do things about it and not let myself get sucked in. But I've been intrigued by the extent to which she is using ChatGPT to help. Because when she was in college as an English major and ChatGPT came out, she was flat out against it. That was not a thing. She didn't want her work in there, none of that. But since she started teaching, she's definitely using it. And I think that is making the whole experience for her much less unpleasant. Like I
Hmm.
think I think back probably for all three of us, those first couple years, the planning and the amount of work you had to do ahead of time was just so onerous that it was. I just remember that, and I think if
No
we could,
curriculum, no standard. So you were just searching,
yeah.
searching. Should I teach this poem? Should I teach that math problem? And not searching online.
Well, and especially if you're in a school or a district without a standards-based and prioritized curriculum.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of districts that they claim they have curriculum, but it isn't. So, yeah,
Yeah,
I think it's
yeah.
it's been interesting. And I wonder, were there other, you know, themes that emerged in terms of, you know, specific, you asked about, kind of Emma's first experience. Have there been other things that have come out where new teachers have identified the areas that are the most troublesome for them?
Well, I think without a question, it's classroom management. I mean, I think that's the thing that schools of education are doing such a terrible job. I mean, I came in with this naive belief that if I was a nice person and had an interesting curriculum, and things would be fine. And it took the kids about 2 days to figure that one out. And so discouraging to see. I remember this girl looking at me as the, there was, all kinds of problems in the class, and she just looked at me like, "Have I got to see this movie again?" I've seen this movie before. Young, naive teachers coming in and thinking they could change, and wanted to change the world. Yeah, that was the thing. I mean, people said, you might say to a new teacher, thank you for your service, like you would say to somebody in the military. But the problem is, you got to be good to serve. You got to be effective. And I think that's where Paul Bambrick Santoyo's article is maybe one of the most interesting ones in this section. Is just, here's what you do in the summer before they come, here's what you do in the first 60, the first 30 days. Here's what you do in the next. So one thing at a time. And, just getting organized classroom management, but then curriculum expectations and a wonderful article leading off the first article in this today's Marshall Memo is by Isabel Stevenson about the instructional task. Like, what is the meaty thing that you're asking the kids to do? Because that's where we lose a lot of kids. It's boring, it's too hard, it's too easy, it's trivial. How do you get a meaty task into their hands and, so that the kids really start getting intellectually engaged? And by the way, back to ChatGPT, the big challenge with ChatGPT is the kids are all on it, especially high school and college kids. And the question is, will they do the mental work? Just the hours and hours of work to become a good writer and a good thinker. And that's my big worry right now, is that there's too much scaffolding, too much support for the kids. Great for the teachers, but for the kids to really acquire those skills that it took us many years to acquire.
Yeah, the
Maybe that's
brain
the next
drain.
chapter, Kim. That's the next one on AI.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be
Yeah, right.
that's a good chapter or
Yeah.
a
Well,
good.
Yeah.
actually, I already have a special issue on it. 997 from a couple of months ago was just pulling together all the stuff so far about that. But that's one of the sections is,
Yeah.
is it going to make kids lazy?
Yeah.
Well, I worry about the brain drain too, because, you know, we and folks, of our ilk have enough experience to be able to look at the output from generative AI and say that's garbage,
Mm.
versus if you don't have any of that background knowledge, that's I worry about that moving forward.
That goes back to the scheduling and making sure that new
Yep.
teachers are working in teams with other leaders and
Mm.
with other teachers. And I think that solves, you asked Mike what other challenges. I think isolation is another huge one because you can spend the whole day as the only adult in the room with kids and you don't get appreciate, it's rare, right? Kids are not coming up to us and saying thank you for your service most of the
Right.
time, certainly in your first few months. And so there's a great sense of isolation. And so by being on a teacher team or a PLC, you get the nuts and bolts advice. You can share your findings on GPT, and a more veteran teacher can say, oh, that'll never fly. But also it's companionship. And when you flip the question and say, what is it when you see a teacher who has been there, right, 44 years, likely they have strong relationships with colleagues on the staff,
Absolutely. And I
right?
remember,
Kids come and the kids go, but the teachers are there year after year,
oh,
right?
100%. And I
Yeah.
remember one of those, during my first couple years of teaching, we had this guy, he just, I was 22, 23 years old. So he was ancient, right? Like older than my parents. And I just
41.
And I just remember him older than I am right now, as a matter of fact. And I remember him saying, along those lines, so listen, we work together here. We don't play hide and teach. Hey,
That's a
hide and teach.
nice one.
You like
Cool.
that one? That is a good one. So the website is the best of the Marshall Memo. You've added the section on supporting new teachers. What's the next one? Have you started thinking ahead on that one? Because we're gonna link to it in the show notes so people can get.
Well, we still haven't finalized. We're putting this one up, and both this month and next month. I know people listen to podcasts forever, but we're going to do some chapter chats about this chapter where we invite people to come read part of it online and discuss it with us. But no, I don't know. Maybe the AI one is the next one. Kim, do you have an idea
Well,
for?
I think the immediate, yeah, we're taking a breath now, but I think the immediate thing is looking at the other 24 on the website.
Yeah.
I mean, there's about 900 pages of, well, I don't know, that's a discouraging number, but there's a heck of a lot of wonderful, wonderful stuff there. My favorite is Making Learning Stick, the whole science of memory. Just the retrieval effect, the spacing effect, and so forth. I mean, there's such good advice for teachers who have this idea that, if I teach them, that's it. Grant Wiggins used to call it the educator's egocentric fallacy. I taught it, therefore they learned it. But there's a one kid in 1,000 who will remember everything you say. And then what are your techniques, specific techniques to get stuff to stick in kids' memory, and then to have you stick in their memory. So when they come back from college or their job, they give you a big hug and they remember you. Because, going through K to 12, kids encounter about 100 different educators. 66 classroom teachers, and then all the other people, the principal, the security guard, the cafeteria ladies, everyone else. And we only remember a very small number of those. So how can these new teachers be one of those who kids will really remember and come back? And because that's a teacher's gold. When a kid comes back as an adult and says, you really made a difference to me. What John King is saying out of these teachers in Brooklyn, who changed his life, kept him from, he said, there's no question without these teachers, I would be either dead or incarcerated now.
On perfect way to end. Kim, thank you for being so generous with your time and for engaging with Jenn in this great work to make all this available to people. Because I think honestly, this is what the profession needs. We know what to do. We know what works. We just need to get people to do more of it.
Hmm. Yeah.
Thanks,
Okay,
Mike.
well, wonderful to talk. And by the way, none of this would have happened without Jenn. She is the organizing genius behind these two books and now this website. And I just take my hat off to her skills and knowledge and ability to push me and get this stuff in really good shape so it's something that people can use.
I thought I was the only one Jenn was pushing to do work.
Uh, she's amazing.
Thank you for the kind words, but I think we know Kim Marshall is the genius behind the genius. But anyway, thanks again, Mike. We really appreciate it and hope people have a moment to check out bestofmarshallmemo.org.